So the one question that we get a lot with regards to cash flow management is pay down the debt sooner or build savings. My name is George Sardakis. I am an associate at Hirsch Financial Services. And today we're going to talk about why cash flow management tends to break down for some people and what young professionals can do today to help them better manage their cash flow, and just some key takeaways and some actionable steps that you can apply to your own cash flow management. The key issue that we see often is that people tend to manage their cash flows reactively, and they check their balances when they need to know if they can afford something. And because of this, the money tends to disappear a lot more quickly than we're used to without a clear sense of where it went. And we don't necessarily have enough money left over to achieve our financial goals that we set out to do. And those goals get pushed off to next week or next month. The fix isn't necessarily more discipline, it's more implementing a framework and a strategy so we can direct our cash flow more efficiently, so we can achieve our financial goals, pay off our debts, and still be able to live a lifestyle that we want to do. So today we're going to talk about four of the most effective cash flow frameworks and strategies, and how to choose one that works best for us, and also how debt repayment fits into all of these strategies, and what to do when the rules don't quite fit our lives and our lifestyle. We want to take a step back and understand the four main frameworks of cash flow management. All of these are going to be divided when it comes to our after tax money. So this would be our net take home pay on the end of each week or bi-week or month, however we get paid. So 50% of our money in the 50-30-20 model, 50% of it goes to our needs. This would be things like our rent, our utilities, our insurance costs. These are our needs that we need cover at the end of every month. And this also includes our minimum debt repayments. 30% would cover our wants. If we want to get a new bag, or if we want to get new clothes, that is all covered under the 30%. This also includes things like dining out, entertainment, travel, entertainment subscriptions, music subscriptions, any kind of entertainment or discretionary spending after we've covered our fixed expenses, our needs. The other 20% goes to savings and debt repayments. So these are items such as our savings, our investment accounts, our credit cards, any kind of major debt repayments that we have or major savings that we have to, this is where that extra 20% goes. And the reason why this works is because it's simple and memorable. It doesn't really require a lot of detailed planning or detailed thoughts or Excel sheets. Bi-weekly paycheck in half, which goes to make sure that we're covering all of our living costs. We want to understand that these, though flexible, they probably should fit well within the guidelines. We shouldn't go to 5% to savings. We want to make sure that we're sticking in and around these percentages, even though they're loose guidelines. What we do want to note is if we do need to adjust these percentages or these brackets, if you will, if items like housing alone covers 40% of our income, we need to recalibrate expenses that we have going on a monthly basis so we can make sure that we're not overspending and we're not maybe utilizing credit cards, or we're not sacrificing from our lifestyle, or we're not sacrificing from savings accounts that we need to make sure we have available to us. So this is best for people who are just starting out and want a simple framework, and they're new to intentional cash flow management. Maybe you have some smaller expenses and you don't necessarily have to tackle major debt repayments or major housing costs, and we're still living at home. So we have the opportunity to better save, or we have an idea as to what 50% of our income would look like as expressed by living costs, so we can future budget later down the road. It's also those who may live in low cost of living areas. Living in New Jersey, New Jersey tends to be a very high cost of living state. So housing alone is almost 50% of my monthly income. So being able to make sure that we can identify that we may live in a higher cost of living area actually puts us in the next rule coming up. That would be the 70-20-10 rule. So we would divide our after tax income into 70% of our net income going living expenses. These would be things like, again, housing, car loan, or groceries, but this also encapsulates wants. This would be things like going out to eat, entertainment, subscriptions, etc. 20% of the income remaining of the 30% goes to savings and investments. So again, these are things like our 401k contributions, after-tax investments, emergency savings, etc. How we divvy up those savings and investments really depend on how much we need to put into our emergency savings and if we're able to contribute to the employer match on our 401k. If the employer match is 5%, then already 5% of that 20 goes towards our 401k, leaving the other 15% to go towards after-tax investments or some kind of emergency savings fund. And now the remaining 10% of the outside 30 goes towards debt repayments or giving. If we have a high amount of outstanding debts, it's obviously that 10% is going to mean more to those people rather than those who maybe just have an outstanding car loan and that's it. Now, this approach works well because it gives a little bit more breathing room for wants and needs and lifestyle and living costs, especially for those who live in high cost of living areas. And it still allows us to prioritize saving aggressively. Now, if our goal here is to prioritize debt management and debt repayments, we may want to flip 20% to be more allocated towards debt rather than savings. And then the 10% goes towards savings and investments. So we can still make contributions to our emergency savings funds given that 10%, but now we're hyper focused on putting more money towards our debt repayment. The main distinction between the 70-20-10 rule and the 50-30-20 rule is that the 70% encapsulates more of the wants and needs together rather than separating them like the 50-30-20. And it really trusts that the person has the sophistication and the wherewithal and the discipline to understand that they're able to put the wants and needs into 70% without compromising other areas of their spending. This is best for people who may have higher capacity for savings and have a reasonable direction as to what their wants and needs are and have a grasp on their own financial spending behavior rather than those who don't necessarily have an idea yet. So they want to be able to have the flexibility of that 30%. So they need to maybe live within the confines of the 30% so they don't overspend on wants and take away from other areas. The third method to cash flow management is something called zero-based budgeting. And that's where we have a more deliberate approach to our budget and every dollar of income is assigned to a specific category where we have net income on a monthly basis minus all allocations ends up zeroing out at the end of every month as detailed as groceries gets a specific dollar amount. Maybe we don't spend anything more than $400 on groceries this month. Dining out, gas for our cars, which in this economic state might be a little tricky, but we don't spend anything more than X amount of dollars in dining out, X amount of dollars in gas, entertainment. We know exactly how much we're going to put into savings. This is where nothing from a dollar perspective gets left unassigned. And it works because it allows for the most visibility and control because nothing necessarily falls through the cracks. Now, the trade off here is that it requires a lot of time, a lot of attention, and it's not passive. We have to be actively attentive to our spending or our spouse's spending. We have to actively monitor these bank accounts. And this is best for people who want full visibility into every dollar and who live on a very tight cash flow situation. And maybe they found that these percentage based alternatives might be a bit too vague. The final method is what's called the pay yourself first. And before we put any dollar to work or allocated, we want to make sure that we have a fixed number towards saving and investments. And then the rest is available to spend however you choose. And this is best done if we automate on a monthly basis. So maybe we have $100 going towards savings and $100 going towards investing. And it works because it's the most behaviorally sound framework and it removes the saving thought from our active decision making. The limitation here is that it doesn't necessarily provide a lot of structure to the other expenses that we have on a basis. It kind of just focuses primarily on saving money first, which isn't always bad, but we want to make sure that the we have still saved goes towards some kind of intentional budget, such as groceries or bills or rent or insurance costs or stuff like that. And so this works best in combination with automation, maybe done on a percentage based level, but it's also best for people who are disciplined about saving and don't want to track their spending in full detail because they have a grasp as to what it is that they spend outside of their bills on a monthly basis. Choosing one of these four options can be a bit overwhelming and may seem a bit scary. So we want to make sure that we want to pick the ones that we feel like we'll actually use. And maybe we try a combination of the four. Maybe we think that some version of the percentage based spending or the percentage based cash flow is going to work best for us. So we try both and see which one works the best. We want to make sure that we consider it as part of our personality. If we want structure, maybe the percentage based is better for us. If we want visibility, then maybe the zero based budgeting is what is going to work best for us. But again, you can always change. We're not beholden to one strategy. We want to make sure that we're choosing the one that works best for us. And the great part is we have the flexibility to pick and choose and try different things out. So we also want to consider which stage of life that we're in. If we're early in our career, multiple competing priorities, maybe having clearer guardrails such as the percentage based spending is our better option. Whereas if we're a higher earner, maybe the 70-20-10 rule is the best thing because we have the sophistication and the experience in differentiating between our wants and needs that goes into that 70%. And then we can maybe go ahead and utilize the other 20 and 10% respectively for the savings and the debt management. We can also do a combination kind of with regards to the pay yourself first method and maybe a percentage based spending. So if we know that we want to save $200 a month and that represents 10% of our monthly income. So we can automate that 10% and leave the other 90 to different categories such as living expenses, debt payments, etc. And then we can also further break down how we want that living expenses to be broken down by fixed expenses versus variable expenses or needs and wants or lifestyle cost and actual living expenses. Addressing cash flow more specifically, we want to understand how our debt repayments fit into any of these frameworks. Debt payments are a part of cash flow in reality. The question is, how do they fit? Now, minimum debts belong in any needs categories because they're non-negotiable. We need to pay our car payments at the end of every month. We need to pay our mortgage. We need to pay the minimums at least on our credit cards. These are non-negotiables. They're obligations. Where it falls into additional debt repayments is if we pay anything above the minimum, such as if we're trying to apply a specific debt management strategy to help reduce our overall debts, or if we want to knock out our student loans early, or if we have a bunch of standing credit card debt that we want to get rid of. That's where these extra payments fit into those debt repayment slots in the percentage based categories. So the one question that we get a lot with regards to cash flow management is, do I want to pay down the debt sooner or build savings? And so the practical framework for this is that we first want to make sure that we're capturing at least the match in our employer 401k plan. That's a guaranteed return in the sense that the employer is giving us free money on the money that we're putting in. So if the employer will match 5% of our income, then we want to make sure that we're capturing that match and contribute 5%. Everything above and beyond that is negotiable. If we open up a individual retirement account, an IRA, if we want to open up an after tax not qualified brokerage account, that's a negotiable. Putting additional savings in excess of our emergency fund is also negotiable. But having that guaranteed contribution into our 401k from our employer is a non starter. We want to make sure that we're capturing that at least. The second point that we want to make sure that we're addressing is building an emergency fund, a starter version, which is maybe $1,000 to $2,000, just to make sure that we cover any urgent emergency expenses, like maybe we catch a flat tire, or maybe an unexpected health event came up and we have to pay for, going to the doctor, copay, etc. Something that we don't want to spend on credit cards because we don't want to run up the extra debt. The third is that we want to make sure that we're paying down aggressively any outstanding high interest debt like credit cards or personal loans or anything that's really above double digits, 10%. And then after we've paid down this debt or at least started to aggressively pay it down, that's when we start to want to make sure that we're actually cushioning our emergency fund with about 3 to 6 months worth of income to make sure that if we were to lose our jobs, that we're sufficiently covered for about 6 months. And then finally, when all of that is said and done, then we can start making advances in our investment accounts, establishing an after-tax account, establishing a Roth IRA after our 401k plan. The interest rate rule of thumb is that if our debt costs more than we can reasonably expect to earn in an investment account, those are the debts that we want to make sure that we're prioritizing first. And then anything below that, again, we want to make sure that we're applying this rule of thumb. If we have a debt that's maybe 3%, we can reasonably expect to return something more than that in an investment account. We can start to make contributions there and then maybe pay the minimums on this interest. These would be things like mortgage or a car loan, etc. This topic does have its own dedicated webinar that we are working on, so more on that to come later. But first, we want to see how we can apply this cash flow framework in real life. When is it that the percentage-based budgets don't actually work? That's when our cost of living is far in excess of 40% or 50%. That's when the framework needs to be flexed, not completely abandoned. And so we want to make sure that we're protecting the savings aspect first and compress the wants categories. Now, we don't want to completely eliminate our lifestyle costs entirely, but we want to make sure that we are addressing spending and we are able to live and provide for ourselves primarily. And then after that, we can go and worry about how much we're going to be spending on going out to eat or going to get coffee, etc. Variable-based earners also have a hard time applying these steadfast rules of the percentage-based expenses because they don't know what their cash flow is going to look like on a week-to-week or a month-to-month basis. These are people like freelancers or commission-based earners or even business owners. They can't reliably pin down a monthly income. And so it's kind of hard for them to pin down a percentage-based expense flow. So the solution here would be to base a framework on the minimum expected monthly income and then treat anything above and beyond that as a windfall with pre-committed intent. So these would be things like rent, car payment, maybe insurance, and a cell phone, for example. And if all of that comes to about $2,400 a month, and we know that we're making at least that, then we at least have our needs and our bases covered. And then anything above and beyond the $2,400 a month needs to be specifically allocated as such. We also want to make sure that we're addressing life stage adjustments. So if we're early in our career and we have student loans, the 20% savings bucket in the 50-30-20 may need to split that between debt repayments and investing. What that means is we may have higher debt that we may need to pay down more, so we may need to trim down on that investment category. Similar to what we were talking about with understanding how debt fits into the overall investment picture when we're going to address our debt management strategies. If we have a growing family, childcare costs can add up really quickly. It's not uncommon for it to be anywhere from $1,500 to $25,000 or $3,000 a month. So that needs category needs to expand significantly and exponentially. And the framework of our budget needs to be able to reflect that. We also need to understand that lifestyle inflation, because of our income growth, is a real thing. And we want to make sure that we keep our needs and wants percentages stable as our income continues to grow. So we want to make sure that, if our income grows 10%, that our 50-30-20 or 70-20-10 categories remain as such, and they're not creeping up, and those wants aren't creeping up, and those needs aren't creeping up, and thereby sacrificing from our savings and our debt repayments. And now applying this behaviorally is a bit of a tricky thing because all of these frameworks work on paper, and the failure is actually the behavioral aspect and the failure to launch. So that would be avoidance or inconsistencies or setting up the framework and actually never setting into it. And there are three ways that we can make these frameworks stick. And the first is by utilizing automation for the easy things like investments for 401k coming right out of our paycheck, or savings from our checking account going directly into a savings the day that the paycheck hits the account, setting up a different buckets where we have those buckets being automatically filled on a biweekly basis or whatever mode that we get paid, whereby you have $1,000 biweekly going into a bill pay account to make sure that our bills are covered, and the savings are going automatically into savings. And then even our bill pay can be automated, where if we know that the water and the gas are coming out on the 15th of every month, it can automatically be taken out of bill pay. So having that automation feature set up is a huge unlock when it comes to making sure that we're applying these behavioral mechanisms and these buckets to our cash flow management strategy. And then finally, making sure that we're doing a regular review and being flexible in our mindset and not being so hard on ourselves if we don't stick precisely to the 70-20-10 or the 50-30-20 or whatever cash flow strategy it is that we actually chose. We don't want to be extremely hard on ourselves, because that's just going to deter us from making those decisions or deter us from sticking to those things, because we think one mess up is going to ruin the entire thing and we're never going to be able to get this finance thing right. So to wrap up, we want to make sure that of the 4 frameworks that we have discussed today, we are actively picking the one that we think works best for us. That all comes from trial and error. We want to try at least 3 of the 4, maybe 2 of the 4 categories, and see which one works best for us. Give it a couple of weeks. And if we feel like one works really well, we just stick with that. Or maybe we apply a combination of the 4, whatever we think works best for us, because the right one isn't always going to be the most sophisticated one. It's the one that we're actually going to stick to. So why don't we try picking one of the frameworks tomorrow and just start slow. Just start slow. Maybe we apply an automation feature to our paychecks where we put money into each of those different bill pay or savings or checking or spend account categories, and having the bill pay automatically come out. So we have a visual representation as to how much money we have coming out of the bill pay account on a monthly basis. And before then, we want to do an audit of our checking account or our spending to see how much we actually spend on these needs, so we know how much to fund that bill pay account. Or maybe we just set up a goal for savings on a monthly basis, and we want to make sure that we're saving $100 or $200 or $300-$400 a month, and have it automatically go into the savings and see how that affects our spending on a monthly basis. And so with all of that being said, I really hope this helps. The goal here is to help to provide a little more nuance, a little bit more of an understanding as to different strategies that we implement in the financial services industry. So thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to subscribe and comment below if you have any ideas for additional future content. Like and subscribe. Follow me on Instagram, LinkedIn, and I look to see you all in the next video. Thank you so much.